is the network of now. It is Friday, October 16th, and this morning I'll be joined by political science and scientist and postdoctoral scholar Miranda Yavor to discuss the confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett, as well as these dueling town halls that happened last night between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We'll get her fresh take on those, and we'll break down all of today's headlines. This is the AM Report. Good morning, everybody. Please welcome Miranda Yavor to the podcast.
Hi, how are you, Alex?
Good to see you, Miranda. How's your Friday?
Good to see you too. Yeah, it's going. It feels nice to have one morning that I don't have to get up crazy early to watch the Supreme Court confirmation hearing.
Indeed, and I am in Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm up 3 hours ahead of you right now. So for once, I get to wake up just a little later than usual. So that's what's going on with me.
Little victories in 2020.
2020, man. We've got 18 days till Election Day, Miranda, and it has been so much to digest this week. And I know that you're an expert in constitutional law and political science, and so I want to break down the confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett this morning. You've been watching all week. The Senate Judiciary Committee held their 3 days of hearings on Amy Coney Barrett. And there were some interesting and troubling things that came out of those hearings, and I wanted to break them down for you. And first, I want to talk about this concept of originalism, which we heard come up a lot during these confirmation hearings. And Amy Coney Barrett does say that she is an originalist, and this is basically when an originalist believes the statements of the Constitution must be interpreted on the original understanding at the time it was adopted. What's your take on originalism, and why is it, in my view, it seems just insane, but why? What are your pros and cons of originalist interpretations of the Constitution?
Right. So originalists believe that we should rely on the original public meaning of the Constitution. The originalists would say, well, we want to ground things in history, in the ideas of their framers, rather than allowing judges to substitute their own views because judges are not elected. The problem, of course, is that our society has evolved a lot since then, and our law is governing not an 18th century society, but a 21st century one, and we should allow our laws to evolve with that, and our standards of decency to evolve with that, and that would be more of the living Constitution argument. So those are sort of that's the general frame for this disagreement. The catch, of course, is that originalism doesn't really actually drive a whole lot of judicial decision-making. Ideology does. And so really when you see a lot of discussion about originalism, it's really sort of the pretext for you doing a lot of ideological decision-making, which I don't mean pejoratively. Political scientists will tell you that judges act based on their own attitudes, their own preferences, whether they're on the left or the right. It's just that people on the right tend to ground it as being justified by this original understanding rather than by their own preferences.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Miranda, but if the Constitution were to be interpreted with the words as they were intended in their original adoption, that would mean there's not a whole lot of room for LGBTQ people, women, people of color, and that's alarming to me as an LGBTQ individual. And for women who didn't have the right to vote, or people of color who didn't have the right to vote when the Constitution was originally adopted, is that problematic to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we could also, another good example of where original public meaning gets into a lot of trouble is cruel and unusual punishment. There weren't exactly humane methods of execution or other or other things in that department as well. So, we still have a long way to go, but we have evolved a lot in our treatment of people of color, in terms of our treatment of women, in terms of our treatment of LGBTQ individuals. And so, if we went based on the original public meaning of, basically, treating individual equal protection, we would not have nearly the inclusive society that we do today. And so, there are a lot of challenges with relying on this older, very outdated understanding. And we saw that Amy Coney Barrett was very much clinging to this ideology with which Justices Thomas, Scalia, Alito are all aligned.
And I'll note the conservative justices on the court on the very first day of this new session of the Supreme Court have called for the overturning of Obergefell v. Hodges, which is the 2015 landmark ruling that made marriage equality the law of the land. We've got a lot of people chiming in this morning, Miranda. Adam Cobb says hello. Stephen Edwards with his rainbow flag. Mark Goldman in Los Angeles. Hello, Jason Carter in Miami, and Shivani from Brooklyn. Shivani says yes, originalism, and it sounds like she's calling originalism insane. So with everything that you're saying with regards to originalism and why it presents problematic implications for the Supreme Court, this is why I think many times we find comfort in the law community. We find comfort in the concept of stare decisis, which is the idea that precedent creates a through line by which the law has some continuity. But Amy Coney Barrett had a troubling answer when it comes to precedent with regards to Roe v. Wade. And I want to play that for our viewers now and get your take on it.
I'm not someone who's convinced that precedent versus super precedent is very much of the most important distinction, but I will say that it was telling which cases she was willing to characterize as super precedent. So Brown versus Board of Education, she made very clear, there isn't going to be a state that is trying to resegregate public schools in a formal way, in a de jure segregation way. But she would not say that Griswold v. Connecticut was a super precedent, Griswold being the case that affirmed the right of married couples to use contraception. And the reason I bring up Griswold instead of Roe is that Griswold was a case that very much led to Roe v. Wade. It's very hard to conceive of Roe happening without the litigation around birth control. So it was telling which cases she found to be so settled as to not really be challenged. With Roe v. Wade, Roe is a case that has been affirmed repeatedly. So it would meet, on the one hand, it is still very controversial. While 2/3 of Americans support it, about upper 60s to 70% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. There is a vocal minority that have been trying to erode it, but Roe was affirmed in Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. It was affirmed in Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt in 2016. Whole Woman's Health was affirmed in June Medical Services just this year. And so we can see, a trail where Roe has been repeatedly affirmed. And so by some people's standards, it does constitute a super precedent. And she was unwilling to characterize either Griswold v. Connecticut, the contraceptive case, or Roe v. Wade as such. And this is consistent with a lot of people's concerns about Amy Coney Barrett and her views on reproductive rights more broadly.
Right. And I think in the Planned Parenthood v. Casey case, the majority court, did even refer to Roe v. Wade as a super precedent. And so it is altogether very troubling. It wasn't the only thing that Amy Coney Barrett was either skirted answering or refused to answer altogether. There was a lot of issues that she declined to answer about, whether it was Roe v. Wade, climate change, election-related cases, a peaceful transfer of power, marriage equality, voting rights, and the Affordable Care Act. She did claim that she's not hostile to the Affordable Care Act, which was her representation. But as we know, her scholarly works and her written works have indicated clear hostility towards these things. Now, some people are saying that this is standard for Supreme Court nominees in these kinds of hearings to skirt answering the question. In your purview, was this business as normal, or was she making a concerted attempt at not answering politically difficult questions?
So it's definitely part of the course for judicial nominees to try to avoid answering questions. There is a lot of evasiveness on Supreme Court confirmation hearings. You probably heard a lot about the Ginsburg rule, though it's important to emphasize that Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her hearing was actually quite forthcoming about her views on reproductive rights and equality for women. So she was not the most reticent about these issues, even though she's often invoked. So we can think about recent Supreme Court confirmation hearings where they actually were willing to say, yes, Griswold v. Connecticut, the contraceptive case was decided correctly. They might. But then, with more controversial issues like abortion, they might deflect and just say, well, this is precedent. And I acknowledge that it's precedent, stare decisis, yada, yada, yada. There were some issues that came up that I thought were particularly troubling that I think any judicial nominee should be willing to take a stand on. And those are those that pertain not so much to policy specifics, such as climate change or abortion or healthcare, but rather things that related to democracy itself. She would not say that whether the president could unilaterally postpone an election. She would not say whether the president should be committed to a peaceful transition of power. And these are things where, we can expect that a judicial nominee is going to try to avoid answering stuff about domestic policy specifics, and just say that they believe in stare decisis and originalism, etc. But it's very troubling to have someone seeking a position on our nation's highest court of law who won't take a strong stand on American democracy and separation of powers.
Absolutely. And Christopher Drago is chiming in with a comment. He's asking, was it me, or did it seem that it depended what party you were from as to whether she answered a question or not?
Well, they were asking pretty different kinds of questions. So, the Republican senators were, trying to elicit from her more an elaboration of why originalism is a guiding philosophy. They would ask her more about her personal background. And those are things where she felt much more comfortable being forthcoming and talking about how she is shaped by precedent, how she is shaped by originalism. Although it's important to note that when Supreme Court nominees are talking about precedent, they're bound by Supreme Court precedent on the lower courts. They're not bound by Supreme Court precedent when they're on the Supreme Court. So those were in general issues where Amy Coney Barrett was going to be more willing to be forthcoming, whereas the Democrats were trying to get her to take positions on particular cases and topics where she was expressing a lot more reluctance to weigh in. But it is certainly a fair point that she was more reluctant than her predecessors.
And I thought, for me, Senator Kamala Harris, who's the vice presidential nominee for president on the Democratic ticket, asked a very interesting string of questions where she took her down a list and asked, do you believe that smoking cigarettes causes cancer? Things that we know through science and through facts are unequivocally true. And then asked, do you believe in climate change? And Amy Coney Barrett declined to answer on the basis of it.
It was debatable. Yes.
I mean, so yeah, I find that problematic because, and the way that Kamala Harris took her down that line of questioning was very effective in showing that when it comes to this issue, and on the basis of it being a politically a political discussion, I thought was very troubling. But there is no illusion about the fact that Amy Coney Barrett will be seated on the Supreme Court. The Republicans have the vote. This entire hearing was somewhat of a sham because we know that the Republicans in 2016 denied Barack Obama his nominee to the Supreme Court, Merrick Garland, because they said it was in an election year. Now we're 18 days away from an election, and they are ramming through this nominee just in time for her to be seated ahead of this Affordable Care Act case that's coming up before the Supreme Court the week after the election. And I thought very wisely, Miranda, that the Democrats, knowing that this is a sham hearing, knowing that there is no chance that they can stop it, use this time to really ring the alarms about healthcare and what the implications could be for the Affordable Care Act in a way that was really designed to drive out voters. Did you notice that as well? And what was your perspective on the Democratic tactic in this hearing?
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats know that they don't have a lot of levers with which to delay this hearing. And they also know that healthcare is the most important issue to voters right now, especially given the pandemic, especially given that on November 10th, the administration is arguing at the Supreme Court that the Affordable Care Act should be struck down entirely. And they have no replacement plan. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that they have no replacement plan after many years, including some with unified Republican government. So they know that healthcare is front and center on people's minds, and they really, I thought, quite effectively coordinated. And I'm thinking, Democrats coordinating, what a concept! Coordinated in this message of tying the Supreme Court confirmation to the erosion of healthcare and really highlighting that healthcare is on the ballot quite literally. And so I thought it was an effective strategy in really showing the concrete impact, because it is very easy to get lost in some very abstract conversations in Supreme Court confirmation hearings, and I thought that they really hammered home the real world importance of this.
And indeed, and so we know that this vote will probably happen next week, just ahead of the election. And speaking of the election, last night, dueling town halls, one on NBC with Donald Trump and the other on ABC with Vice President Joe Biden, competing programs. This was after Donald Trump refused to debate Joe Biden in a virtual setting because of his COVID-19 diagnosis. And so they had town halls last night. And I thought Joe Biden presented a pretty cogent, policy-oriented discussion that was not politics, was not anything unusual. It felt very normal. I want to turn the conversation a little bit to Donald Trump's performance last night and play a clip for our viewers of some of his more problematic answers. The headline, of course, being his refusal to denounce QAnon, which is a right-wing conspiracy theory movement that is proving to be very harmful. Let's hear a little bit of that answer.
Sounds like it was sort of almost both sides. There are very fine people on both sides. Yeah, no, it was that would have been a really good opportunity to denounce QAnon. I mean, it's also worth reminding people that there are a lot of there's a handful of QAnon believers. I don't know what the right word is. Um, who have who have won Republican primaries and who the president has praised. And so it is this very strange conspiracy theory that has a lot of dangerous elements to it, and seeing him not take enough of an interest to learn about them, or if he does know about is familiar, and I believe that he probably is familiar, more so than he let on, to not denounce it was certainly troubling.
Christopher Drago is commenting, I thought Savannah kept a good rein on him, and it did seem like Donald Trump was on defense quite a bit throughout the evening. He refused to answer questions about whether or not he tested positive for COVID, when he learned of his positive diagnosis. When asked whether he was tested ahead of the debate with Joe Biden 2 weeks ago, he said, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It seems to me like he'd remember that kind of thing.
And did a really good job of pushing back on him when he was spreading misinformation about masks. He used this very inaccurate figure about the percentage of people wearing masks who contracted COVID. And she did a good job of pushing back and saying that was not an accurate characterization.
Indeed. And I have one more clip I want to show people. This is on Donald Trump's response to his taxes, the tax return story that came out of the New York Times, and this revelation that he owes $421 million that are personally guaranteed to an entity we do not know to whom. And let's hear a little bit of that now.
Nothing is going to connect with the working class voters of Michigan, like saying $421 million is just a small amount.
Right. And he did seem to confirm that he does owe that money through his answer, although we have to kind of glean it from his answer. But, I think it's very problematic that he owes $421 million potentially to a foreign entity, which one I can probably guess, and what the implications are for his presidency if those debts come due, which they will in the next 4 years in his second term. To whom does he have a vested interest in paying personal favors? I think it's extremely troubling. We got some comments. Santa Clarita says, charlatan. Stephen Edwards says he is the worst. Christopher Drago's eyes are rolling. Did you have any other takeaways from this, from the night of dueling town halls?
I mean, I thought it was troubling to hear his answers on the taxes, and this is exactly why we expect that presidential candidates, especially presidents, release their taxes, because we do want to know where their investments are and where they might have a stake. One of the things that was interesting and contrasting, I watched President Trump's, and then I switched over to Biden just sort of during commercial break, and then for the last half hour, was I think whoever was banking on Biden being senile or sort of not 100% there should probably show themselves out because Vice President Biden was wonky. He was prepared. He was polished. He was engaged. He was wonky to the point of being boring and sort of throwing out almost too many numbers to support his positions. And I was joking with some friends that Biden can make politics boring again. And I think that after the last 4 years, that would be a pretty big relief for a lot of us.
You're telling me here's to having a boring president. I'm looking forward to that if it should happen. We've got a comment from a MAGA account that I think is excellent, actually, and I'd like to just shine some light on it. I know that we're going over time. MAGA She at Colleen RN _ She MAGA, which is really aggressively MAGA, asks, have y'all talked about Biden deals yet? Don't show Biden's launder offshore accounts. I think really interesting to note that we now know that this story about Burisma and Hunter Biden is a Russian intelligence campaign that's being targeted towards Western media figures, including Rudy Giuliani, who apparently was used as a tool in disseminating this Russian misinformation. Do you think that this is something that's taken hold, and has the Biden deal story, the Burisma story, been given appropriate weight?
I don't. I think that it's gotten more than enough weight. I don't think that we need to elevate conspiracy theories or Russian disinformation. And I think that I do have mixed feelings about Twitter and other platforms making it difficult to share stories because on the one hand, we don't want to spread misinformation, but on the other hand, I'm sort of a speech absolutist, but it is a private company, and they get to make those decisions on their own. And that's the fact that the fact that it was very quickly identified as disinformation, I think, was effective in controlling its spread. Hey, Alex, are you back? I'm on Twitter at Miranda Yaver. Reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks,